Welcome to the Impact Over Optics podcast, a place where real progress shines beyond appearances and distractions. Here, voices from across industries come together to share wisdom, stories, and strategies that remind us what's possible when purpose leads the way. Because true progress is not measured by how it looks, but by the impact it leaves behind. Let's get started.
Welcome to Impact Over Optics, the podcast where we go beyond appearances and focus on what really moves the needle: authentic leadership, purposeful results, and lasting impact. I'm your host, Dave Dieffenbach. Today, I'm joined by Josh Schmitz, a leader and author in the veterinary industry. With more than 20 years of experience in veterinary medicine and animal health, Josh is a true servant leader dedicated to fostering collaborative, compassionate environments that put both veterinary teams and patients first. He is passionate about streamlining processes, improving patient care, and empowering veterinary professionals to deliver their best work. His leadership philosophy is grounded in listening, empathy, and service. He focuses on building strong relationships with staff, clients, and colleagues while driving operational efficiency and patient satisfaction. Josh is also the author of Because I Was Inverted, a book built on his experiences to share learnings about servant leadership, and a book I really enjoyed reading. And that's our topic this month. So let's go. Josh, while we get started here, anything I missed in your bio or anything you want to start with?
No, I mean, I think that's good. It's always when I get one of those, it always sounds really good. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds quite good. I'm like, all right. No, I think it's great. Yeah, it's definitely leadership and overall is definitely a passion of mine, and especially that world. My wife's a veterinarian herself, home specifically in that field overall. But I think a lot of these principles and things apply to any field or avenue, and even some personal life stuff. So
Absolutely. And I love this industry too. So I'm grateful that we met through it. But I want to start really talking a little bit about maybe a softball question. I already know your leadership orientation because I read your book and the topic is servant leadership. But where do you think this started for you? Where did you get the grounding in this concept of servant leadership?
yeah, it's something I thought about because I've been on a couple different things, obviously, around the book and trying to think, like, could I really pinpoint like where that orientation started? And I don't know. I don't know that I can like narrow it down specifically. I think probably a lot of it, goes back to probably how my parents brought me up from the beginning of trying to be, a humble individual overall. And so I think that's probably where it really, really first started, is just having those good, core values set forth by my parents, early on and growing up. But beyond that, trying to think of like where it started. I don't know. I think it's something that kind of developed along the way, as I went through, personal and different career paths there. So I don't know, there's like one singular like event. But I think it probably started, just at, a young age. It's just the different things that my parents were teaching me of, trying to kind of be just a good person, right?
Yeah.
Kind of that golden rule that holds tried and true out there. So
That don't be a jerk rule, right?
pretty much,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So tell me, all that you've got a great grounding. Your parents hopefully acknowledge that they taught you well, gave a good basis. Did you feel like it came naturally to you to transition it into leadership, or was that more of work?
I think it came pretty naturally. I think it, like I said, I think over time, a little bit was, looking at, some was seeing people that I saw as good leaders, mentors, that kind of stuff, and wanting to kind of model and mirror them. Unfortunately, though, there's the flip side of, I saw some things
Mm,
that I would say would be, I looked at that, early on in my career and being like, whenever I get into a position that is not who I want to be, which I think, happens to a lot of us out there. And, we can either, kind of repeat those sins of the past, or we can try and, break the, chain there and do it differently. And so, I think it came pretty naturally. Like I said, I think it's built on, kind of who I am overall. And so I think, it took time. I wouldn't say like instantly was innately, and even to this day, I would say I'm still learning and growing and getting. But I think overall, it was a pretty natural progression and step forward as I kind of started to get more leadership opportunities, and they came a little bit at a time. I think it was easy to kind of take more of that approach because it felt natural to, like I said, who I was versus trying to potentially do it another way, which I think would have felt more forced and unnatural to what I believed
right.
was the right way. So
Yeah. And you remind me of Simon Sinek. There's a quote that I'll misquote now, but whenever someone calls him a leadership expert, he stops him and says, "I'm a student of leadership,"
yeah,
because it's an ongoing growth opportunity for
yeah.
sure. So yeah, in your book, you use a lot of great analogies. I'm going to call up a few of them throughout our discussion, but one of them is actually an acronym that was new to me. The acronym is LEAP, and I love a good acronym. I think I got through college making up acronyms. Tell us a little bit about what LEAP means to leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, LEAP, it's not just a cultural framework. I think it's really a leadership framework, and so, L is lead with levity, E is express emotion freely, A, appreciate loud, often, and real. And then P is play with purpose. And so, for me, I just think when leaders are consistently practicing, those four things, it doesn't build cultures, but it builds environments where people have the energy to give their best rather than simply just trying to survive another day. And I think each one of those elements really it reinforces a different core servant leadership principle to me. And, so levity creates connection, emotion creates understanding, appreciation creates value, and play creates engagement. And so I think, those are just really things to me. I think when you're looking at those, it really goes a long way to creating, the type of work environment that I would want to be in
Yeah.
myself.
I feel like in some ways the impact over optics, we did our topics backwards because we've had a couple recently. One was on friendship and one was on humor. And both of those you touched on. Levity is such an underused term. And I'm seeing it more and more. I think people are realizing that doesn't mean you have to be silly, but you can be light about things, even heavy things. You can have some
Yeah,
levity. Yeah. It's such a
for
good
sure.
good lesson.
Yeah.
In our opening podcast, I didn't expect you to have listened to it, but I told a story about a vice wing commander at an exercise I was at when I was in the military, and I tried to take the broom away from her, and she said, "No, this is other duties as assigned." And you've got a saying in your book about let them hold the brush, and it's an
Yeah.
homage to Bob Ross, who we were talking about before we went on live. Talk a bit about what let them hold the brush means to both your employees and as a leader.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I had to give some love to Bob Ross there. As you said, we were talking about it before. I mean, I still vividly remember sitting, watching on PBS with Bob Ross painting the happy little trees,
Hmm.
there. But I think what Bob Ross did so well and, talking through, it wasn't even so much the actual thing, but he had a vision, right, of what that picture was going to be. I mean, he walked his way through it, right? He was talking as he was going, but he knew the vision and he was creating, a physical representation of that image as he went. And so I think for me, letting them hold the brush is at the end of the day, each of these individuals, they're in a role for a reason, right? And so you have to let them go out there and paint their own picture, right? As a leader, and a servant leader, I believe our role is to, paint the vision for them, give them a representation of where are we trying to go, give them, the framework for it, but then you have to let them hold that brush and paint their own picture at the end of the day. And it may not be the exact way that you would paint it, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong, right? That's their interpretation of that vision. And each, you're going to probably get 10 different pictures. I don't know if you've ever gone to one of those things where everybody's in the room and they're talking you through it and they paint it and you get done and all those pictures look way, way different.
Yeah.
But they're similar, right? And so for me, that's what letting them hold the brush is. I want to create that overall vision, the mission for them in it. But then at the end of the day, I want to give them the brush. They have the paint. Go ahead and paint
Right.
their picture.
Yeah, I like that. It empowers people to feel some ownership
Yeah,
and to put their
absolutely.
especially in veterinary clinics where people oftentimes don't have a clear career path. You
Yeah,
can
and
help them find it.
yeah, and that's what I tell each and every one of, the leaders I get to work with is treat this as though it was your business, right? You get to own the day-to-day operations of it, and I want to empower them to think that way,
Yeah,
right? And so that does mean letting them hold the brush and not trying to take it out of their hand and be like, no, 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 no. Here's how I want this bird painted, or here's how I want this tree on there. You gotta let them hold the brush.
that's so important. Now you have to do an exercise with your leaders where you put them all together in a room with a pad of paper and describe what to draw to make your point.
I think we might have to.
Yeah, it might
Yeah.
be fun. In our discussion as we started the month too, we were discussing whether servant leadership is a model in and of itself or an overarching philosophy. What's your thought on that? Do you think it blends with other models, or is it really a model?
Yeah, yes and no, right? Like I don't
Yeah.
want to take a cop out, but
Yeah.
a little bit. I think if you're truly embodying what, I think people associate as servant leadership, I do think there's, some other models that people would classify in there that also are going to come along with it, right? I think you're going to get, some coaching leadership, which is one that's talked. I think you're going to get some situational leadership in there too as well. But I think they encompass that. And so I think that's where, yes, it is its own thing, but I think there are components of other ones that go in there. If you're doing it to, the manner in which I think a true servant leader embodies those things. I think those are probably the main ones I think would stand out to me. I think, there's some other ones that I would say are probably, in contrast to it. I think there's a little bit of transformational leadership in there too as well, because you are trying to develop those leaders under you. But yeah, so a little bit of a cop out answer,
No, not
but
at all. Not at all.
it's
In fact, if you weave it in as a philosophy, if it's more of an upbringing and a philosophy, it makes a lot more sense that you have to
yeah.
pick the tools. And actually, that's probably a problem for some people trying to define their leadership style because we also evolve over time, or we ought
Yeah.
to, right?
You should. Yeah, exactly. If you're not growing, you're dying. So
Right, right. So let's take a little turn here on servant leadership, but we talk about another analogy where in the book you talk about the VHS tape as a great example of something that you could hold on to. You can buy them, you can hoard them, but they didn't have a long life, and you become sort of a distant collector if you hold on to old things like that. How does that analogy play into servant leadership?
yeah, well, I would like to hold on to Blockbuster still long. I would still like to my daughters be able to walk in on a Friday night and
I
understand
can still smell it.
understand
Oh yeah,
is the video behind the box that I want.
that's great.
But no, I think, I would say it's a big learning lesson for me, over the past, probably maybe 10 years or so of being able to, let go of certain things. It's, I think most of the time, if you're put into a leadership role or, those kind of things, it's because you've done something right. And, you're probably fairly decent at performing those functions yourself. And so there's a lot of times that innate thought of just, well, I'm going to do it myself, right? Like I know how I want this done. I know it'll get done this way. And so you hold on to it, right? But at the same time too, similarly too, hanging on to those VHS tapes that become obsolete. Nobody has VCR for the most part anymore, and they're just taking up space. And now we've got some of those at our house, plus boxes full of DVDs, and they're not doing anything other than taking up space. But it's occupying, opportunity in our minds or, in our rooms to be able to do other things. And so for me, I think that's the biggest thing is coming to that realization that first off, I don't have enough bandwidth to do all the things that I need to do. And so I need to trust those individuals to do it, right? Give them the brush,
I love it.
and do it their way. Might not be my exact way, but as long as it's getting done, to an appropriate level, that's fine. But it's also allowing me to grow, right? Like it's freeing me up to be able to do other things that I wouldn't have been able to do if I held on to those things that I would already, that I have already mastered and know how to do. And so to a certain degree, you're creating obsolete, traits in yourself because you're not growing. You're staying stuck in those areas you already have because you're not willing to pass them off to others.
Right, right. And in the topic of unlearning came up in the book, and I related to this because it's really hard to do. We talked earlier
It
about
is.
constant learning, but yeah, am I right that unlearning does tie well to this
Oh,
topic of allowing change to happen?
oh, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, it's difficult. And I would say it's something I still at times, struggle with, but it's hard, right? Because unlearning, it takes us losing control. And for the
Yeah,
most part, nobody likes to lose control, right? But you have to trust. It's kind of that fall, trust fall thing, right? Like we're losing control to catch ourselves and trusting that others are going to do it. And, like I said, I hit on a little bit of it, replacing that my way approach with our way, right? Like it's not maybe the exact way that I would have done it, but it's still an appropriate and a completely sufficient way to do it, and that's okay, And I think another piece in there is it's listening. There's a lot of listening right on there. So yeah, unlearning is hard. It's a hard thing to do still to this day at times. So
yeah. I'm going to think about all the reasons why it's hard to do because something's worked for you in the past. It doesn't mean it's going to work for you in the
yeah,
present.
for sure, for
Yeah.
sure.
So a little bit about leadership on the receiving end. If I'm in a team and there's a servant leader, what kind of feeling do you want the team to have? How do you know it's working when you're a servant leader?
That they feel supported, right? I think that's the most thing is that they feel the support's there. I tell each and every one of them, when I'm interacting with individuals, that what my role is may look very different to them on any given day of the week. And on any given day, I might look different to 5 different leaders, right? And so I think the biggest thing that I want is that they feel supported and that they feel like they're getting what they need, from me. And that can look a bunch of different ways. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I always want is that they feel support not only in performing their role, but also support in the development of them as well. I think that's super important of finding out, what is it that they want to achieve at the end of the day. And sometimes it's just being great at what they do. And
Right.
there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think sometimes there's that feeling that oh, I have to want more and I have to grow. No, it's like, no, that's okay. You can just be happy in the role you're in and being the best. That's okay. And we'll work on those things. But if it's something where it's like, no, I want to learn these new things, great. Well, then we're going to lean into that. So I think for me, probably the overarching thing is support.
Yeah, and I'd like to amplify that message. It really resonated with me, that idea that it's situational, depends on who you're talking to. And you can sometimes be perfectly okay with being the best at what you do rather than always
Yep.
saying, I want to climb that ladder, which is something we talk a lot of time in the podcast where I write about. Everyone thinks they want to climb the ladder.
Yeah.
And it's hard to admit that you're pretty comfortable where you are. And
Yeah.
that's
Well, and
okay.
I think the other thing is everybody thinks they want to climb to the ladder sometimes until they get to the top of that
Yes.
ladder and then they see what's up there and then they're like, actually, I don't know that I wanted to. I might go back down. Is that
Yeah.
okay? I didn't want to get up here
Yeah.
once I see the view.
You made a comment earlier that oftentimes people get promoted into leadership because they're doing a good job, but it's not uncommon. My first leadership role, I got formal training on being a leader 3 months after I got hired or promoted, and I had to
That's because
unlearn all of my mistakes. Yeah,
sometimes there's no training on
yeah,
how to be a leader. It's you're good at your job and now you're a leader.
right,
Figure it
right.
out.
So that does lead to a point of leadership isn't always fun. I know in the book you
Yeah.
talk about dance parties. You talk about a team. Actually, in one of your posts, you talked about a team acting out Hamilton, which is phenomenal. You actually showed it. Those are entertaining, but there's always
Yeah.
the other side, right? Sometimes you have to make tough decisions, cuts, layoffs, coaching. How should a servant leader? How do you shift into that mindset of handling those difficult discussions with the team?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily even shifting, right? I think it's that overall relationship that you've built from the beginning, right? So I don't think it's, transitioning there. I think it's creating those deposits early on. And so, I think it's taking the time in the beginning to build those relationships with each of them. So when you have to have those difficult conversations, you have that there to fall back on, at the end of the day. And so I think it's a component a lot of times I think that gets misconstrued with servant leadership is that it's, being soft at the end of the day. And I would say it's far from it,
Right.
right? I think a lot of times I make a lot of analogies too of, leading teams is to, raising my 3 girls. And it's the same thing, if you're raising, if people are I think, I don't know if you've heard it, but I've heard it's like, okay, if you're raising your kids and it seems hard and you think you're failing, you're probably doing it right
That's right.
at the end of the day versus if you're like, this is so easy. And it's like, well, you maybe not hitting it, hammer on the nail there. And so I think a lot goes to with leading people. It's not supposed to be easy. It's going to be difficult, right? There's going to be those hard conversations. But I think if you've done everything right leading up to it in terms of connecting with them and building those relationships, you can have those tough conversations and they'll know that they're coming from a place of caring and accountability at the end of the day.
That's such a great response because it reminds me too that there's a consistency there. If you have to go put on a different hat when you're doing the difficult conversations than you were, people won't know how to understand you, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's move into what we call the rapid fire questions, and this isn't timed, but just intended to be quick answers. What do people most often misunderstand about servant leadership?
Well, I might be jumped the gun there slightly. I last answered a little bit, but I think, I hit on it recently on something I posted. I think it's just that. I think that people oftentimes think if somebody says they're a servant leader, they're soft, that they're a pushover, right? That they're not willing to have difficult conversations. And to me, it's the exact opposite. I think they are very much, staunch in who they are and what they believe in. And having difficult conversations is an integral part of being a servant leader. And I think holding somebody accountable and having that accountability is critical. It's doing a disservice to them if you aren't. So I think to me, that's the biggest, I think, misconception a lot that's out there around, servant leadership.
Yeah. And your comment before, it's not softness. It's not soft. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What tends to get in the way for young leaders who are aspiring to be leaders in becoming servant leaders?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of times, and I would probably say guilty of it myself early on, is, coming from a sports background growing up, want to prove yourself, right? You want to show like how good I am, that I can do this. And I think sometimes, proving themselves can stem from a couple of different things. And I think it probably varies a little bit based on the individual. Sometimes it's ego from, one side of the pendulum. And then on the other side, there's insecurity, right? At the end of the day, I think they're trying to prove themselves, but for different drivers as to the reason why behind they're trying to prove themselves. And like I said, guilty of it myself, early on as I kind of got in there. Like I said, I was used to being, doing well in sports. And it's like, all right, now this is what it is. I got to go out there and try and prove to everybody how good I am versus now, to me, it's about giving, the recognition and glory to the team at the end of the day, because they're the ones doing it. And I'm here to just help them.
Yeah. No one likes to show off in sports, right? Yeah.
Not at all.
It takes the team. Last one here. Of all the pop culture references in your book, do you have any favorites? Bob Ross, Batman, Ferris Bueller. You had a bunch of great ones.
Man, that's a tough one. I feel like that's a little bit of like, which is your favorite children, right? Like you love them all. You love them all equally. You love them for their different strengths and weaknesses and all those different things. So man, I don't know. I think it would be hard for me to really like say like, "Oh, this is an absolute favorite." I definitely love there's the dad side of, making those references. But I think for me, it's, the references they're relatable, right?
Yeah.
Like I think it helps people connect and they're like, oh yeah, I know what that looks like at the end of the day. It's something they're familiar with. But I don't know. Like I would say like a couple that are my favorites because I'm gonna cheat. There's no way I think I can narrow down to one. But big Disney family. So I got a chapter in there. Couldn't get through it without giving Waldorf. So that's a big favorite of mine. Got one on The Breakfast Club. I would put that up there. Love all the 80s movies, Goonies, and Over the Top. Just took my daughter to see Top Gun in the theater. So the 80s ones are a big fan. I would put that up there as well. And then probably to round it out, Bob Ross. It brings back so many, I think, core memories for me as a kid of just, sitting around watching that. So
that's fantastic. Yeah. If people, they should definitely read your book, but also use it as inspiration to turn on 80s TV on a weekend and just watch The Breakfast Club or whatever's on, because it's such a trip.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How many of these references did you have to explain to your daughters, or they're so used to you hearing talk about them?
I for the most part, not. There's a few. I'm definitely trying to, I feel like, culture them to some of those things. I am definitely, and I think it's probably wherever you grow up, you're like, this is the best. But I definitely think, the 80s and 90s and that's when there was the best of many things. So I think for the most part, they're fairly familiar. Plus we got some in there that speak to them a little bit. Some, Lord of the Rings and Lion King, which they're definitely familiar with. They've been, informed on the VHS and those kind of things. So I think overall, there wasn't too many I had to explain to them overall.
Well, that's great. Well, you didn't write the book for them anyways. You wrote it for...
it is though. It is for them. I dedicated it to them in the beginning, that I hope after their dad is long and gone down the road that they can look back and be proud of what's out there. And they are, them greatest gifts in life. And the greatest thing that I'll leave behind is them. And so, like I said, I think, a lot of these things in the book are applicable to, workplace and leadership and that. But I think there's a lot that translates over into personal and family relationships as well. And so, hopefully some of these things I'm able to relate to them and they can carry them on into the world. And that is my greatest gift that I give back. So
I love it. And if you're doing this well, like I think you are, you're also generating a lot of energy where future leaders who have worked with you are hopefully spreading the model of empathy and listening, like you mentioned. That's we need more of it, much more of it.
That's my hope.
Yeah.
That's my hope at the end of the day.
So wrapping up, if listeners can walk away with just one tip from this topic, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, I think, focus on people at the end of the day, whether it's in work, personal lives. That's what life's all about, is, recognizing that and building those relationships at the end of the day, I think is so critically important. I think, unfortunately, today we've lost a little bit of it. Technology is a great piece, but it's diminished some of those personal relationships at the end of the day. And so I think, just continue to look and seek out those relationships with people wherever they are and build those, because those are the things at the end of the day we get to carry on, that money can't buy, is those relationships we have at home and at work. And they do carry on beyond. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I would hope somebody would walk away from.
That's awesome. And I hope so as well. And Josh, I want to thank you for joining us and bringing the positive energy over servant leadership here to the Impact Over Optics podcast. If you're listening or watching along, please follow Josh on LinkedIn. I'll have some links in the show notes that include ways to find the book. I highly encourage it. For now, I'm Dave Dieffenbach, and remember, authentic change always outlasts appearance. Until next time, lead with purpose and leave a real mark. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us on the Impact Over Optics podcast. We hope today's insights sparked fresh ideas and reminded you of the power of purpose-driven work. Please share this episode with others who believe in real change, and join us again as we continue to look beyond appearances and focus on the impact that truly lasts.